Hey guys, my name is Shalisa Ansola. Welcome back to Cults to Consciousness. We have a very special guest today. We've done 2 episodes with her already. She's incredible. Her story is heartbreaking. I pretty much cried through the whole thing, although I was trying to keep it together during the interviews. She came from the Children of God, and today we are talking about her insider to the cult because she actually was born and raised with the cult leader himself. So thanks for joining us, Serena Kelley.
Yay! Thank you for having me back again.
Yeah,
Nice
yeah,
to
you've
see you.
been.
Looking forward to the chat.
Yes. And so, guys, if you're joining us live, thank you. Hello, hello. Make sure you drop those questions for Serena in the chat. Jonathan is at home starring them for us, so we will get to a bunch of your questions. We did want to start off with actually, let's talk about the response so far. So, I'm going to read a couple of comments here from your video, and then I want to hear from you how it's been going public once again after a year of silence.
Yes.
So, the one of the comments I wanted to highlight said, I lost my soulmate and children's father, later turned abuser, to the abuse he suffered from the adult women and other children of this group. Nobody ever listened to him because he was always hysterical about it. I'm so glad to be seeing more of this brought to light. Keep exposing them. Whew. Yeah, it's heavy, heavy stuff. And this is a
Yeah.
content warning for anyone just joining. We will be talking about CSA, probably not in any sort of detail like we did in the 2 episodes with Serena here, but we will be mentioning it because that is a huge part of Serena's story and the cult itself. For those who aren't familiar with Children of God, the whole idea is God is love and love is sex, and we need to sexually liberate everyone, including the children. Unfortunately, there was a lot of horrible things going on. Serena was actually given to the cult leader as a child bride at 3 years old, and that is just the tip of the iceberg of her story. So, before I just get into the weeds, 2 more comments that I wanted to read. 28 minutes into this video, and I feel like I've aged 20 years. What a strong person Serena has become. CSA needs to stop now. That was
Yeah.
145 votes. And then the last one from Don, I don't know how you made it out and are able to have the strength to expose this abuse, but we are grateful for you and happy you are out. And I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and share. I know how difficult it is to talk about CSA, and we both mentioned afterwards, like I went and got a massage. You went outside and did
I
some
went
like
on a hike.
outdoorsy thing. Yes. Yeah, because you gotta get it out of your system. We talked a lot about that in your
Yeah.
part 2, the second episode, of how you actually somatically release some of that trauma. So, what was this like for you recording, and what's the response been since it's been out for a few days?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It was honestly just perfect timing to that you reached out, and your community that you've built is amazing and so supportive. Everyone that's reached out to me, I've read every single message. I responded to every single person who messaged me privately. And I just have to thank you for building an amazing supportive community and people who are really interested in survivor stories and not just the sensational stuff, but really interested in the entire healing journey. And I think that's the part that we often gloss over when survivors like us tell stories, because people want to hear about like, ooh, what happened in the cult and like the exciting stuff that goes in the news. And then we kind of brush over like how we got to the person that we are today, like that comment said, to even be able to talk about my life.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the response has been amazing, and I've been speaking about my life since 2019, and I've often been called really horrendous things on other platforms. Like I've been called a liar, I'm a narcissist, I have mental illness, and I should be in jail with my PEDO parents because I'm choosing to forgive them and move on with my life instead of pursue justice. A
Yeah.
lot of stuff. So that is also why I took a break for a year and talking about my story, because like you said, when you are talking about this heavy stuff, you need self-care, but there is also backlash that comes with it. And I was kind of prepared for a lot more backlash. And that just speaks to the importance of community and building the right community and appearing and making the right choices to appear on the right sites where people actually get what you're talking about, and you're able to articulate and you're able to explain your story to a crowd that can understand and that wants to hear it and also wants to share their own stories and their own struggles. So thank you to everyone who messaged me privately and shared your own struggles and things that happened to you. I know that takes so much courage to share something with a complete stranger and something so vulnerable and probably a lot of times something that you haven't shared with others. So thank you so much for all of the support and the messages. It's been really, really wonderful. I came back from my hike all refreshed and then went through the messages and read every single one and responded to every single one of you. I just finished today though, because I had a lot of messages. So if you didn't get a response yet, check your email, it's there.
Wow, that's so amazing to hear. I love that our community has just rallied around you, and I don't even know if I can say I'm responsible for the community. They all just kind of showed up, and I just am so honored that people are so amazing in the comments, and it really does feel like a community. Often people share their own traumas in the comments, and then others rally around them too. So I feel honored to have built something like this with Jonathan and our team. So today we wanted to dive into a little bit more of the insider of the cult because I don't know if people are aware if they've seen your previous episodes, but most people in the cult didn't even know what the leader looked like. They were completely blind following this guy. And so, can you explain why that was the case and then why you were privileged to know him yourself?
Yeah, the Children of God is a really interesting case study because it's one of the only cults ever in the world created that blindly followed a leader they did not even know how he looked like. They just saw him in the cult illustrations in the publications, and typically he was either drawn as a cartoon figure, as like an old man with a white beard, or he also Berg called himself Mo Lion. So a lot of the cult publications had a picture of a man with a lion head. And these were the kind of drawings that all the leaders would show to the rest of the cult, all the people, all the rest of the cult people. And nobody saw how he looked like. There was pictures from the early 60s and 70s, the late 60s and 70s, from when he began the Children of God. But ever since the 80s up until his death, nobody saw how David Berg looked like. So that was also a way for him to keep traveling around in secret because he did live in countries and also very close to other cult communes. For example, when we moved from the Philippines to Japan, he lived a half hour away from the huge community that we grew up in with 300 people. So if he ever was walking down the street with Mama Maria, his wife, or anyone else, literally not a single cult member would even recognize him. They would just pass him on by as some other old man walking by. So he had total anonymity. He could go anywhere he wanted. He could appear in a cult compound and just act as an old guy and nobody would know. There were actually top leaders would wear disguises as well in the cult, and Berg would wear sunglasses, a big hat, coats and jackets. My mom wore wigs all the time. She's depicted in a lot of cult videos wearing all kinds of wigs. She had different names. So Berg was able to travel around like that. He was also always on the run from authorities. So that was also another reason why he didn't want his image out there, because he didn't want ex-members of the cult being like, here's how he looks. He's in this city.
Right.
Go get him. He's in this village, because that actually did happen. In the Philippines, my grandfather was able to trace down my mother, and he sent his nephew to Berg's cult compound because my mother was there. So we all had to move, of course, in the middle of the night in secret. So Berg, because people were always after him, and families of cult members were also after him, he had total anonymity, and he basically swore anyone to silence and to secrecy. And that's why I wasn't allowed to talk about knowing him or talk about his life, because he didn't trust anyone. It could be, and any one of us could say something like, oh yeah, I went to the store with grandpa the other day, and they'd be like, huh, who? And so it was all just very, very secret and very hush hush.
Mm-hmm. And your mom was a top leader, and that's why you got
Yes.
to be so close to him.
Yes, I was born in David Berg's house. He named me my cult name, which was Mary Dear. And he also named me Serena. I chose to keep Serena. It's my name now. It doesn't have anything to do with him. I don't associate with Mary Dear. I've literally never been called Mary Dear except in the cult. So that left when I left the cult and we moved on. But Yes, and then I was raised about till 5 years old, living with Berg in his house, and so I saw firsthand the methods that he went through to keep himself secret.
Yeah. So let's talk about first why you're the only person who is willing and or able to speak about this.
Yeah, there are other people who grew up around Berg that could speak about it, but everyone makes their own choice. They really do. And my older sister in the past has come out and spoken, and the Berg's two children, there's Davidito, which is Ricky Rodriguez. He committed a murder suicide. He killed one of his nannies who abused him and then killed himself. The other nanny was my mother. And then his sister, Techi, she is living a very private life. She had a child very, very young from an older man, so she just wants to live privately. So there's the four of us. So at this point, I am the only one who was kind of the chosen children, the ones that were depicted in the life with grandpa, and like the children who were going to carry on the leadership of the cult and everything, who is speaking out right now and is willing. You never know what could happen in the future, but as of right now, I'm the only one that has insight into David Berg's inner circle and the cult.
Yeah.
There are other people, but I'm the one that's talking about it at the moment.
Yeah. And I think everyone's grateful that you are talking about it and are willing to talk about it. So let's get into what he was like. Was Berg anything like what was depicted in these magazines and the media, the
Oh,
cult
in the
media,
media, the cult
the cult
media,
media,
the
not
cult, the
not
cult.
the outside media, not
Yeah.
the secular world.
I was like, oh yeah, he's definitely like that. Um, yeah, no, not at all. So in the cult, for those who are not familiar, cult, the Children of God was very secluded. We were not allowed to watch anything that was created, watch, read, listen to anything that was created outside of the cult unless it was sanctioned by David Berg himself. So I grew up watching like The Little Princess with Shirley Temple or Heidi or The Sound of Music. Those are really the only movies that I saw as a child that were not created by the cult. So in the cult publications, they had full reign of what they wanted to draw and what they wanted to publicize and what they wanted all the cult members to learn and to read. So that was why he was able to keep such control over the cult members. And of course, if he's the one telling everyone what to read and how to write and what is going to be published, of course he's going to paint himself in this wonderful light. So Berg often described himself as a lion or a shepherd or like grandpa to the children. So like he went down in the ages. So first generation adults, the adults who joined, he had them all call him dad. So he was like everybody's father. Then us who were born from the adults who joined the cult, we had to call him grandpa. So he was like everybody's grandpa, like everyone's nice, fun, cuddly grandpa. That it just gets weird when you start thinking of all the CSA and the child marriages and everything. It's terrible. But yes, so he depicted himself as this very strong leader and the voice of God. And of course, every cult leader, God only speaks through them, and they are the
Hmm.
only ones that have the full direct access to God, and everyone else must believe what Berg is saying because that's what God's speaking through him. So he portrayed himself as this very nice, friendly grandpa, but truly in real life he was a drunken slob, and as we know, completely perverted and a pedophile. So he was absolutely horrendous. There was no cuddly grandpa situation going on, or like, let's read stories together by the fire, like it was just, there was nothing about him that was anything that he depicted. For example, he did in the cult publications, he did depict himself as a shepherd with a rod, a staff, a shepherd's staff, and a long cloak. And he actually did wear these things and use these things. He would walk around in a long robe, And mind you, we grew up in the Philippines, so it's very hot. So he also had like nothing underneath a lot of times because, perverted and or very flimsy underwear. And he would walk around with a literal staff. So when he would walk around the property, it would like, oh, grandpa's here. Everyone come out and say hello. Because Berg, he lived on our compound, but he lived in a separate house away from the rest of us. So we lived in one big house, and he lived in a house that was called the Swiss Chalet in one of the properties that I remember the best. And he lived there with Berg lived there with Karen Zerby, his wife, Mama Maria, and then Davidito and Techi, Ricky Rodriguez and Techi. So he would appear with his staff in his robe and walk the property like a prophet, going around, and the adults would all grab us and like, oh, come say hi to grandpa, here he is. And we'd all have to stand in line outside waiting for our turn to see grandpa. And so he'd like, oh, hello, and hug us and pick us up. And it really depended on the situation, but I specifically remember him having this very strange smell about him. And he would always pick me up, and it just was like his beard was very thin and like kind of yellowish and gray and white. It was just very it was very uncomfortable for a 2, 3, 4, 5 year old to be always told like, this is your grandpa and go say hi to him and give him a hug. And later, very much later on in life, I because of trauma and triggers, I started smelling that smell later. And I realized it was a smell of like old alcohol, like when you have a hangover and you have alcohol breath from the next day. That
Mm-hmm.
smell really triggered me in my 20s when I started drinking and smelling like when you're hungover. And I was like, what is this smell coming from? And I finally realized it was from Berg. And Berg was drinking all the time. I mean, it's no secret. He was a pretty raging alcoholic and had a ton of liver problems. So yeah, that was one story and smell that really stuck with me.
Jeez, do you think he really believed that he was the prophet, or do you think it was just one big power grab?
I feel like it started as a power grab, but if you tell yourself something for long enough, you will start to believe it. So
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty sure at the end he just was like fully convinced that he was the mouth of God and he was the prophet. And who knows, with someone drinking like that all the time, like your mind is not right with you. And with all of the crazy experiences and the pedophilia and everything, like I think it's a mixture, and I think it definitely started as a power grab for sure, and then just
Hmm.
escalated into just unhinged beliefs about himself.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you wanted to add about Berg before we moved on?
Some memories, stories.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, someone else had also asked, like how was it just on a day-to-day basis? And like I mentioned, he was in a separate house, so we never saw him. Like he didn't come to breakfast or anything, and we were all only allowed to go to his house on invitation only. And then the times he would emerge would be usually for like dinners, big gatherings where we would have, 3 to 4 hour prayer and prophecy sessions. And another thing, building off Berg's entire persona of him being this prophet for God and this king, he would also have robes, a staff, and he also had a literal throne, like in our living room. And it was on a raised platform. And he would come pretty much, really honestly, at all hours of the day when he had like some dream or some prophecy that he felt that he needed to tell everyone, and gather everyone around. And we'd all have to sit there like looking up at him because he was in a raised throne platform, and he'd preach and yell and scream for like 2, 3 hours. There was many times where us kids, Davidito, Techi, my sister, and me were sitting in the front. I mean, I'm 3 and 4 and 5 years old. I don't have the capacity to sit there to this drunken man like raving about, sex and flirty fishing and God's prophets and God's horrors and all the things that he was always talking about. So I would sometimes get up and leave and try to go to the kitchen and get food because we were always hungry. And yeah, the adults would catch me sometimes and give me some good beatings for that. But I tried to get away when I could.
Jeez, what was your impression? So, obviously, you're so young and you were given to him so young, and you tell that story on your episodes with us. But aside from that perspective of him, do you think as a child you really believed, wow, he's a cool guy, he's a man of God, he's telling us something important, or were you just like, this guy is crazy?
I was so young too. It was really hard for me to get on board with the things he was saying. And
Yeah,
I didn't understand half of it, but as cults are, I was scared of him. He ruled by fear. If anyone would not be down with his latest rant about whatever his dream was, all of his perverted dreams about him and his family members and his daughters and his granddaughters, if you were not on board with that, if you were not saying, like, yes, dad, amen, praise the Lord in the meetings, he would single you out and he would sometimes bring you in front and shame you and be like, are you an old bottle? Is the devil working through you? Blah, 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 blah. Like, it was intense. So I was scared more than anything,
yeah,
like before any sort of belief system or anything. But I didn't know that he was this amazing leader of thousands of people all over the world, because obviously I was a
yeah.
kid for one and I had never left the compound. I had no idea of my own status in the
Hmm.
cult and that I was considered like this special child celebrity person. I was just in fear for my life all the time, trying to avoid a beating, trying to avoid getting abused. So I didn't even have time to really think about what he was saying or to believe anything. I just assumed this was like the guy in charge of everyone. This was our grandpa who was in charge of everybody, and he had the final word. He had the first word and he had the final word, and that was it. That's what I grasped at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to talk about what it was like when you realized you were a celebrity and how you had to hide your identity. But first, for everyone joining live, I want to answer some questions. So, Jonathan's been starring them. If you guys have questions, make sure to leave them in the chat. Jenna wants to know, Serena, are your parents still together? Was your dad aware of everything going on in the cult?
My parents are not together. They were separated a long time ago, like 20 years ago. Yes, my dad was, everyone was aware. This is the thing that I think is very important to mention, because everyone was aware of what was going on in the cult. People didn't speak up. Adults did not come to our rescue. People did not try to help because everyone was ruled by fear. Anyone who stepped out of line was going to A, be shamed publicly, be punished in some horrible way, or B, separated from their own children. That was the way of how the cult controlled the group, with separation. The way my mother was controlled is they separated us from her. As soon as we went to Japan, she was sent to another house, and I was raised by someone else for the rest of my life. My dad never raised me. I did not see my father from the age of 5 to the age of about 16. And so to me, he was a total stranger. He did not, which I rarely talk about him because he literally was not even in my life. My mother was. I actually received a letter from my father in Brazil, probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old, saying, I'm so sorry, I can't be your daddy anymore. But Uncle Jerry and Auntie Julie, which was Jeremy Spencer and his partner Dora, they are your new parents now, and they're going to raise you. And yeah, I mean, my dad always sent us cards. He always sent us something to try to have us remember that he was our dad. But other than that, like literal, that communication was cut. So yeah, they have not been together, and they're also both not in the cult. I don't speak to my mother at all. I have no idea where she is. I sometimes speak to my father, but again, I'm not close with my parents at all because both of them didn't raise me, and the one who did kind of raise me was a horrible abuser.
Hmm. Wow, it's so hard to grasp that hundreds and thousands of adults were just forced to be on board with
Hmm.
rampant CSA and to not only be on board with it, but to justify it themselves and to
Yeah.
do it with their own children. It's mind-blowing. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about your mom because I had mentioned off camera with you, I've been doing these interviews with Children of God survivors, and all of these dots have been connected with your interview because I'm like, wait, your mom is the one who wrote the Davidito book. And for those who aren't familiar, oh, geez, it's just hard to even say. It's basically how to abuse children sexually. And there are photos, and it's very graphic. And you can see why Davidito, who is featured in this book, would have done what he did. So I wanted to talk about your mom because I wondered your perspective of her as a child. Were you aware that she was this big leader? What was she to you? Did you feel connected to your mom at all, or did she also just kind of hand over her parental rights to other people in the group? A lot of questions there, so just pick whichever one you want to
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah, that's a great question because we all feel connected to our mother. She gave birth to me. She brought me into this world. It's very hard to like just be disconnected like from my dad because, but my mother carried me. Like there is an inherent connection between you and your mother, which is why I had to do so much healing work with the relationship with my mother because it was affecting the relationship with me and other females because I couldn't trust anybody. But yes, there was always a connection between me and my mom. And of course, as a daughter, I want my mom to love me. So I'm going to do the things that she says, as horrendous as they may be, or as wrong as they felt for me at the time. But she also had a lot of help in raising me. That Jeremy Spencer and Dora raised me from birth. And I would also kind of just be passed to her for some mommy time and fun time. But my mom was a very violent, abusive woman. She would do extreme corporal punishments, a lot of smacking across the face, a lot of physical abuse, like literally throwing you on the floor and kicking you. So, and it just goes from there. So just like Berg, I was extremely, extremely scared of my mother and what sort of temper she was going to be in because she was just constantly, you just never know when she would go into these bouts of violence. And with Berg, and the Davidito book, there's been some horrendous shit that oops, sorry, some
It's
horrendous
okay. You can
stuff.
swear. That's fine.
Okay, whoopsie.
That's okay.
Um, that my mom wrote. So the Davidito book was one, which is basically a handbook on child abuse and how we should sexually awaken children by 2 and 3, 4 years old, and literal
Mm.
pictures of her doing it. But what also people don't talk about as much is the story of Meanie. Meanie Berg was David Berg's granddaughter, and she lived with us. She actually helped to take care of me a lot, and she had some mental disorders. But of course, in the cult, we don't believe in diagnosing anyone with mental illness or getting them the help that they need, either medication or therapy or some kind of professional help when someone has schizophrenia or bipolar. Like these words did not exist in our childhood. So Minnie Berg was often extremely physically abused by my mother as well. And there's cult publications of Berg literally instructing my mother to beat Minnie and how to do it and to do it with a stick to tie her to a bed. It's all online. It's all searchable. And these are the horrendous things my mother did. So as a child, I didn't know that this was happening. I wasn't in the room when she was getting beaten and tied to the bed, but I just was experiencing the after effects of that because when you're a mother and when you're literally anyone and you're beating a child, you're not just going to walk out and be like, well, and then I'm going to forget about that. Like you are carrying that with you for the rest of your life. And of course, she brought that physical abuse to me and to my sister, and we were constantly in fear for her. So as much as I was connected to my mother and wanted her to love me, she was not a safe woman to be around from the very beginning. I never felt safe with her. So of course there's happy memories with her sitting outside or giving her a hug, but truly it was all out of fear. Most memories
Mm.
are all fear.
Wow. Oh, that's a lot, Serena. Thank you for sharing all of that. I can just imagine, based on how my body's responding right now, is just constant fight or flight mode as a
Yeah.
child, just never that feeling that you can take a deep breath and be safe. And were there any other questions? Let's see before I move on with my thoughts. Kay wants to know, Serena, how were you able to travel through all the countries you did? Did the cult issue a passport? Oh, I'm so glad you asked this because I
Oh
meant
my
to ask
God,
it during
such a
our
good
interview.
question.
Was it a
Such a
fake
good
passport?
question. No, we actually all had real passports, but our legal names were changed multiple times throughout the years because of security reasons. But yes, we had passports. I had an American passport my entire life. I was born in the Philippines. I actually am not sure if I had ever had a Philippine passport. I was very young. But by the time we started traveling, we all had American passports, and our legal names were changed multiple times for security reasons, and so we could travel the world. And the cult, they paid for all of our travels, and the way we paid for it was through all the cult members singing and begging on the streets and selling all the cult publications, selling the CDs, and giving a tithe to the leadership households, which was anywhere from like 13% to 20% of what they brought in from the sales or from begging on the street or from singing or from any of their supporters, from the women who were out there doing flirty fishing, the religious prostitution, and they would send that money to the leadership homes where I was, and that funded our travels and that funded our entire lifestyle. And that's why when I left later on and I started going to other cult compounds, I was shocked to see everyone living in poverty and squalor because I had grown up in amazing houses with floor to ceiling windows, pools, tennis courts, atriums with parrots, massive yards and massive gardens. And then the rest of the cult members, if you were not in a huge compound, if you were just a little 30-person household somewhere out in the country, somewhere you were stuffed into a 3 or 4 bedroom house of 30 people, and people would sleep under the stairs, people would sleep in garages. I've slept in attics, I've slept in garages, I've slept under the stairs, I've slept outside of a house where it was like a outhouse lighthouse thing. So people were just sleeping wherever they could because there were 30 people stuffed into like a 4 bedroom house.
Jeez. And that switch, when you went to other places and now you could no longer be married, dear, it was don't tell anyone who you are, don't tell anyone you know grandpa, and you're switching from this, I don't know if you could call it a lavish lifestyle, but just what you described, complete change. What did that do to your psyche of like, I'm kind of famous, but I can't tell anyone about it, and I have to make up all these things about my life? We talked a little bit about that in your interviews, but if there's anything that you want to add about what that did to you as a child.
Yeah, the hiding my identity was probably the biggest mind fuck because as a child they're like, okay, grandpa, everybody love grandpa, and we're great and we're this big family. Then as soon as you leave, it's like you can't tell anyone about grandpa. And you're like, what? What does that mean? And so then you're sitting there in these meetings or these prayer and prophecy sessions and these cult brainwashing sessions where you're sitting for 2, 3 hours and you're reading things that grandpa has said because you were there when he said it. And then you just kind of have to sit there and pretend like you've never heard it or never seen it for the first time. And that's kind of when these things start happening, like it's just it messes with your mind very much. And that's kind of when I started questioning things more and being like, wait, what is going on? And then as I got older, and then I could talk about my life once Berg was dead. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, everyone knows I'm married here now. And I'm already like 12, 13 years old. And then I was allowed to travel and go to other cult compounds and then seeing the disparity between where I had just come from, where it was just like 3 different pools, 3 different houses on the property, 16 fruit trees, backyard, a mountain, and then literally like just a tiny place on the street in Brazil, of course. So there's very high walls and then a bunch of shards of glass that they would glue onto the top of the wall to prevent robbers from coming over. Bars everywhere. We're sorting through moldy food. We're sorting through rotten vegetables. I'm picking maggots out of the fruit and cutting around the maggots so we can eat the fruit. And I'm
Mm.
just like, what is going on? Like, that's when I started realizing there's something seriously wrong here. Like, my life the way I was raised, yes, I would not say lap of luxury, but I never wanted for anything. I was hungry because we had specific meal times, but I had a place to sleep. I was always out in nature, climbing trees. I learned how to swim and dive at 2 years old because I was always around pools. And then to come here and there's these tiny houses, to come out of the cult hierarchy, the cult leadership, and to see the disparity of how actual cult members were doing. And remember, none of these cult members had ever seen Berg either. So they're all doing this by faith. Berg had everyone programmed so much that they just believed we are going to heaven and we're going to get so many stars on our crown. So we have to witness for God and get these souls for heaven and tithe to grandpa. And I would see these members of the cult counting out the change, like, okay, 13%, like mail, putting them in little envelopes to mail to the leaders of the cult. And I'm thinking, we don't need it. Like, I just came from my mom's mansion where she had a private secretary who just cooked her up bananas with chocolate sauce and coconuts, and she ate it by the river where the parrots live. Like,
Yeah.
what? Yeah, it was crazy to see the disparity. And that's when I started questioning everything and realizing things were absolutely not what they seemed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. And you talk about this split in your personality where you had to make up your past because you weren't allowed to talk about where you actually came from and who you actually were. And then when people found out who you were, you're getting bombarded and bullied. And I'm so sure that what must have been so confusing for you, especially as a young tween. And I want to get more into the dissociation and the split personality of that. But first, let's see if there's any other questions that we can answer here. Anusha, hi Serena, thank you so much for sharing your story. Was there ever any sort of run-in with the authorities? Great question. Like, how did the leadership get away with this for so long and in so many countries?
Amazing question. People ask this all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it started with flirty fishing because all the women were, flirty fishing, for those who don't know, is religious prostitution. Basically, you're finding rich businessmen in bars and hotels, you're picking them up, you're having sex with them, then you're telling them about Jesus and getting them to give you money in return for having a sexual relationship with them for as long as they wanted. So as long as these men were giving money to these women were literally whoring themselves out and having sex with these men. And a lot of the men were targeted. They were high businessmen, they were police chiefs, they worked at embassies, they were mayors of cities, they were anyone who, they were senators. It was anyone who was in a position of authority. They were not going after like the cute hot guy at the bar that had like a handyman store down the way. Like, it was targeted. It was specific businessmen. It was people who worked at embassies. It was people who worked in passport control. It was always chief of police, a lot of cops, a lot of sheriffs, people who had the power to get our way and to get us around. And that's how we were able to travel, and that's how we were able to evade authorities a lot. In Brazil, there were many high-ranking officials that had relationships with female members of the cult, and the cult got away with so much stuff in Brazil because of that. And all kinds of people we were able to get away with the stuff that we did because of the relationships with authorities and because of the relationships with high-ranking officials in every single country that the Children of God was in.
Ugh. So it's just all corrupt. It's just all
Totally
corrupt. That's
corrupt.
so disheartening.
Yes,
Wow. But I mean, smart on their part to do that, but still,
totally
it's,
smart.
oh, wow. And also just hiding the children whenever they needed to, telling you guys to lie. And, if you're ever approached by a cop, this is what you say. No, I'm happy. I'm not abused. I'm
Yeah,
fine. So, oh, wow. Okay. Any other
yeah.
questions? Serena, did you ever have a relationship with your actual grandparents? Ooh, such good questions
Oh,
today,
wow.
guys.
Amazing questions. Yeah, really, really sad. I never saw my grandparents until I was 15 or 16 years old. My mother's mother was a very kind woman. She always was reaching out to my mom. She was always writing my mom. She was always trying to get in contact with my mom. And my mom would, send her letters back or like burn them in the fire and stuff. Very sad. My cousins would write me. Sometimes they would send me photos of themselves. And mind you, I am Selah, which means secret. Nobody's allowed to know how I look either, because I lived with Berg and I was always in top leadership positions. I distinctly remember a message from my lovely cousins, which I am now in contact with, and they've supported me my entire life. And I just don't know how they did it, but thank you to my cousins. They sent a photo. I was 8 years old, and they said, "Oh, this is me, and here's my brother. And can you send us some photos of you so we can see how you look like?" And I had to write back and tell them, "I'm sorry, I can't send you a photo, but I live with Uncle Jerry, and he's going to draw a picture of me, and this is how I look." And I sent it.
That's so sweet.
Oh, yeah. I don't know sometimes how my relatives, like, kept up the good fight in always trying to stay in contact. But my grandmother, she was finally able to see her grandchildren when we left Brazil and we went to Dallas. She still lived there in Dallas. And many of my memories after that were visits with them in between the ages of 16 to about 25, and then she died. So it is very,
Mm.
very happy. And but on both sides, I saw my grandparents on both sides, which was wonderful
Wow.
that I got that opportunity before they all passed away.
What was that reunion like when you showed up and you're like, hey, it's me, your grandchild. I've been in a cult, sorry. Like, did you talk about it? Did they just bombard you with questions? Did they respect your, what you just came from? Did they have any idea what you just came from?
My dad's side was pretty chill. There were no questions. It was just fully welcomed into the family, like, "Oh my God, we love you. We don't care. We're just glad you're alive and you're okay."
Yeah.
Um, with my mom's side, oh yeah, there were a lot of questions. They actually would bring my mom into a separate room and question her, and then my cousins would question me on the side, like, "So tell me about your life. Like, where have you been? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah," because they were curious and they wanted to know and they did research. So a lot of, by this time, my cousins had already been in college. Things had happened in the news. My mom was already in the news a couple times. Berg had already been in the news. The Children of God had been in the news for
Okay.
years. So they did their research and they knew the type of cult that I was raised in, and they were very curious to hear about my life. But of course, when I saw them, I was 15 and 16, so I'm still like, "Yeah, everything's fine. Like, I just love my
Yeah.
life so much." And of course, to me, to answer the question honestly, all of my relatives were strangers to me. I had literally never seen them in my life, and I wasn't allowed contact with my own relatives. So to me, seeing someone for the first time and then they put me in the room and they sit down and they're like, "Where do you live? How have you been? What's going on?" Like,
Yeah.
that's a lot for me to handle. So I just
Yeah.
shut down. I wouldn't say anything. And it took me a long time to build a relationship with my mom's side of the family because of their questioning, and they were so curious about my life. But thankfully, I have a wonderful relationship now with all of my relatives. And that's all I can do is build from here. But it was very, very difficult because, as you know, I was raised to believe grandpa was my grandpa in the cult. So I'm
Right.
like, "How are you my grandpa if I already have a grandpa?" So there was that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Grandpa, who was also your husband at one point. It's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions here? Let's see. Victoria, I was born and raised in the same cult. Oh my gosh. And I'm listening to your side of the story. And listening to your side of the story is very interesting. We all left with terrible trauma. I'm happy you are healed and healing. I'm on the same journey. Wow, thank you for
Oh,
sharing,
thank you,
Victoria.
Victoria.
Sending love to you.
Wish you all the best. I hope you found some healing and peace in your life as well.
Yeah, and if you ever want to share, you can always email us,
Yeah.
cultstoconsciousness@gmail.com.
Yeah.
We're here for you. Okay, someone says flirty fishing. I think you mentioned it, but basically sugar daddies for Jesus, right?
Yes, yes. Religious prostitution.
Oh, geez. Okay, I read River Phoenix was in the cult too, and his brother Joaquin because of their parents, so they must have infiltrated Hollywood too. Yeah, what do you know about these guys?
Yeah, I wasn't ever around them. Rose McGowan was also in the cult. She writes about that in her book Brave, as well. So there's been a few infiltrations in Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood is kind of its own cult itself. Who knows what's going on in there? But yeah, that's the cult that River Phoenix and Joaquin Phoenix grew up in. I would be so curious to read is it Joaquin Phoenix memoir? I don't
Joaquin.
know if he has one, but I would love to hear his
Yeah.
childhood, about his childhood.
Yeah, I
Um,
actually just put our research assistant, Rachel Hay, if you're listening, I was like, find out if he's ever told his story, because I would just love to interview him. Do you know
yeah.
where he grew up, what part of the world?
I have no idea. I know River Phoenix actually talked about it. I don't know if it was in Europe somewhere or a Latin American country, but he talks about there's some old interview and he talks about singing in the streets, and begging in the streets as well. There's some interview where he casually mentions it and then kind of brush it off. But Rose McGowan goes
Yeah.
into detail about her life in Italy, living in the countryside and going all over Europe and stuff. Yeah, I read her book specifically because she grew up, in the cult, and I wanted to see what her life was like too.
Maybe we'll try and get her too. If anyone has
Yeah.
connects, let us know. Cultofconsciousness@gmail.com. Okay. Are people still in the organization cult now? Are there groups in Mexico and where?
There's no groups. Everybody is in single family homes. It's an online church now. From the last I looked it up, it had about 13 to 1500 members, mostly all old people, all first generation adults who had joined
Hmm.
and just can't figure out like why everything crumbled the way that it did. But pretty much as soon as the children start leaving, that's their bread and butter. Like, we supported them singing in the streets and begging in the streets. That was their money maker, and making those videos. As soon as the children started leaving, you don't really have a cult if the children aren't on board. So it just kind of
Yeah.
imploded from there. So yeah, the first kids left in the 90s. In the second, I was part of the second wave in the early 2000s, and then by 2010, that's when the third wave came, and yeah, it just went from there. By 2020, it was pretty much nothing.
Yeah. Do you know if they're still called the Family International?
I think they're called the Family Church or something like that. They have the name The Family still in it, which is weird. Like, didn't you want to do a rebrand again or something? But
Yeah.
I think they call it the Family Online Church.
Oh, okay. And oh, for those who are wondering, and you can chime in on this because you're gonna know way more than me, obviously, but they did do away technically with the child abuse stuff as far as it not being part of the doctrine or the practices, but it was still happening behind closed doors. Is that right?
Yeah, they officially did away with it in 1986. They were like, oh, I guess we can't have child marriages now, and can't have sex with children.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that we're already a decade in, so I mean, it was still happening. It never changed. It did not change from one day to the next. I mean, kids were
Yeah.
abused the rest of the time in secret. Obviously, everything was done in secret pretty much after that, especially when you got into the 90s. But the family officially said that they had stopped all their child abuse practices in the late 80s,
Yeah. I'm just wondering
which
if
was a
that's
lie.
why, if people are like, are they still going now? If that's why people haven't really infiltrated it or tried to shut it down completely because it's not like it was before. But
It's
that
just
I
a
could be
bunch of
wrong.
old people. It's a bunch of 70-year-old folks living in their homes and retired and tithing and reading their Bibles and whatever cult propaganda they're still sending around. So yeah, unless somebody, wants to, which has been successfully done by Hope Bastine when she got her abuser from her childhood in Scotland put in jail. It's been successfully done once, but it takes a lot out of you, a lot of energy. You have to do a lot of research. You have to prove a lot of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's been years. I'm 40 years old. I would have to go back 35 years to find all of this stuff. That would be a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Victoria says, Serena, I also grew up in the Children of God in Brazil. I'm starstruck because, yes, you are a celebrity. LOL.
Those
My
who know,
question
know.
is, what happened to Techi Davidito's sister?
She's living her life privately, and that's all I'll say. She wants a private life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for keeping that a secret for what she wants. I mean, it's everybody's prerogative to tell their own story, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
I thought it was really interesting how you also had a personal relationship with Davidito, and as much as you're willing and or able to share about that relationship, I think a lot of people would be interested to know who he really was, having grown up with him firsthand and kind of the slow descent into what happened.
Yeah, he was such a great person. He called himself our brother. So he was literally and side note, he was called Petey with us. So we were always called a different name as usual. There was a public cult name, and then a private leadership only hierarchy name. And he was called Petey with us, and he would call, I'm your brother. And he was amazing. He was quite a bit older than me. He was 9 years older than me. So by the time I was born, he was already 9, and I grew up, he would take me around. He taught me how to ride a tricycle when I was younger. He was always very into building things. He would build a lot of things with my dad, and like he would love to go on little adventures with my dad. We'd swim all the time. We lived overall, when we weren't being abused, we lived a fairly normal, decent life. I mean, we also, like I mentioned, lived in literal mansions. We had a koi fish pond, so we go look at the koi fish. We had a park in our house, so we go play on the jungle gym. We were living in nature all the time, so we were always out playing together. And then, there were the dark times too, and the public punishments and everything. And of course, when we were separated from him later on in Japan, and he was still living with Berg, we would still visit them in Berg's secret house, and we'd have playtimes there. And then we lost contact for a bit as we moved to Brazil. And then around the age of 10, I got back in contact with him again through some letters. He would send photos of wherever he was. He ended up leaving Berg and Maria's compound and traveling around different places in Europe later when he was a teenager, and he would always send me photos and updates. We had like a true brother and sister relationship. And then later on in Mexico, when I was already 17 and 18, wanting to leave the cult because I had left first at 17 and rejoined to be with this boy, and had every intention of getting him out by the time I turned 18, and no one could stop me. Ricky was really instrumental in encouraging me to continue to leave the cult, because at that time he was starting to speak out about his life. And Berg was no longer alive. His own mother was calling him a demon in the cult publications, and my sister too.
What?
Yeah, they said he was possessed by the Vandari. They had these names for different demons in the cult. There was Pan and Bacchus. They just took names from mythology and made them into their own demons. And Ricky Rodriguez and my sister were called Vandari because they were speaking out against the cult and all of their negative talk, and they wanted God to smite him down with lightning. And I had a secret email address that Ricky would email me from, and I'd check my email, and he'd be like, did you read that bullshit about me? Like, you know me, I'm not a demon. And I'm like, oh, I know. Like, let's leave. And he really wanted me to leave right away, but I wanted a plan, and I wanted to have some sort of exit strategy, because I had already left the cults, and I had seen what the ex-cult members were doing, and they were sitting around smoking pot and not really doing anything with their lives. And I wanted to be able to do something, and I wanted to make money and have something to show for my life. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I partied for 6 years and took a bunch of drugs, and I don't even know what happened during that time. So like, I'm no one to talk about smoking weed. My
Side
nose
note.
is sore. But I wanted an exit strategy. I didn't want to just leave and be on the street like so many other people were, and I was able to see that. So I did push back on him a little bit, and I waited until I was 18. So that allowed me to leave Mexico, go to Houston, and immediately be able to get jobs where people would actually hire me and I wasn't underage and needed parents' approval to work at a job or something. And so during that time in Houston, Ricky was in contact with me the whole time, and I actually flew from Houston to California to meet him in person twice. And the last time was about 6 months before his death, and I through our communication, I could tell that he was really, really struggling. But of course, I was struggling just as much. And
Mm.
one thing that people don't realize when you grow up being a child celebrity in the cult is you're programmed to think that this person is this child is a celebrity and they're somehow responsible for making you happy. And I got that a lot. People would come to me and be like, I hated your mom. She was so mean, and start telling me all these things about my mom. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, I spent a good portion of my life apologizing for my mom until I realized it wasn't really my problem to apologize. It wasn't my issue to handle. But I only realized that once Ricky was gone. And I saw firsthand the way that kids would look at Ricky because he was the chosen one. He was the oldest of the four celebrity children, and I was the youngest, and he was going to take over the cult from David Berg, and he was going to lead the family to heaven. And so when you're taught these things as a child or a cult member, it sticks with you. So I could see that he held a lot of responsibility for other people because we were told like you're leading and everyone's looking at you, and Ricky even on like a much larger scale than I ever was. So he felt the weight and he's felt so responsible for all the ex-members, and it was heartbreaking because it wasn't his responsibility at all. And I truly feel like he did the best that he could in looking and finding his nanny and killing her and trying to figure out where his mother was. And he did the best that he could with because he felt so responsible for the rest of us. And it's heartbreaking when you put that type of strain and that type of responsibility on an innocent child. And that was just one of the many things that he had to carry with him in his life on top of all of the abuse that he suffered.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that perspective because I hadn't considered that the reason he killed his nanny was some sort of sense of responsibility of taking things into his own hands, justice of some kind. I had just thought revenge, but I feel like that's a much clearer picture to paint, having that perspective of the weight and responsibility that he was feeling.
Yeah, we had many talks about it, and that was it's so much more multifaceted and multi-layered than just revenge. And I think
Yeah.
people don't understand that unless you have someone who has been in similar shoes or has spoken to him who can
Hmm.
understand that side. So I think it's really important to mention that because not many people would know.
Yeah. Do you feel like that was a huge turning point for the cult when that became public and you had mentioned that all of a sudden you're on TV because you were associated with him? Do you think that's when things started to fall apart?
100%. That's when everything shifted for everybody. It's like that moment is our 9/11. Every single ex-member and member of the cult knows exactly where they were when they heard Ricky had committed a murder suicide against his former nanny. And it's just, yeah, everyone remembers that moment, and nobody's life was the same after that because that showed any child who was questioning still in the cult, something's not right.
Yeah.
Why would he go and kill someone? Was he that possessed by a demon? And that also validated so many people who had already left the cult, my older sister and I included, that yes, we are actually not the crazy ones. We're actually trying to find a better life. We actually saw all of the abuse and we said, no more. We're not taking it anymore and we're leaving. And so it changed the perspective of every single person in the cult. And of course, the media frenzy and the media storm that came after that was intense and insane. And then, of
Yeah.
course, like my mother was the other nanny. Why is she still alive? Like, let's start finding information about her family and her. And then that's when you just turn on the news and it's like, shh, oh, there's a picture of me and my family on CNN. Okay.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
just, my life was absolutely never the same. He changed the trajectory of so many people's lives, and in doing what he did, which was wrong, but also very understandable, he had played a massive role in a lot of kids leaving because of what he did, because so many kids were on the fence because the second wave of us had already left in the early 2000s, and Ricky died in 2005, I believe. So that solidified a lot of people who were questioning, a lot of kids who were on the fence to be like, I'm out, because if he did this and all these other kids are leaving, like maybe they're not the crazy ones. Maybe it's where I am. So he was
Hmm.
very instrumental in getting that third wave out.
Yeah. I mean, what we just discussed, and like you said, it was wrong and it's horrible and it's awful that it happened. And in some ways, he did create some sort of justice for what happened and helped others see things clearly and leave. So,
Hmm.
wow. It's heavy. It's a lot to talk
Yeah.
about. It's a lot to think about. And I mean, you lived it, so you understand. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention about the inner circle before we go to some final questions?
Not much. I mean, it was just crazy town, really. Like,
Crazy town.
and I laugh about it, and people often ask, like, how can you laugh about it? It's so serious. But people have to understand, like, this is my life. I didn't know any other life. I really didn't. So I had nothing to compare it to until I left. And I had to do a lot of healing work. And I mentioned I first sought out therapy because I just wanted to talk about my life honestly without crying. I could not
Hmm.
speak about my family, and I could not speak about Ricky or anyone without bursting into tears. That's the only reason why I started therapy. I had no intention of like going on a bunch of podcasts or whatever. I just wanted to be able to talk about my story and not cry. But it just goes to show, like, once you're on the other side of healing, you can laugh about it because it's just so insane and it's so crazy. That I've suffered from a ton of depression, and I'm just in a space where I'm embracing joy in my life. And I'm so glad that I'm at a stage where I can talk with some of my friends who have also left the cult and sit around and joke about the crazy stuff that we grew up in. I mean, people would come into our room in the morning singing songs on a guitar about good morning, God's children, and open the windows. And then another adult would come the next day and blow a whistle and get us all up out of bed military style. I mean, that's just crazy. Like, you have to
Yeah.
laugh about some of this stuff at some point, or else you're just going to constantly be depressed, which I already was. So I choose to laugh about it, but in no way does my laughter take away the seriousness of the situation and the victims that were all in the cult. But I choose to find happiness and joy in my life. And that's why I'm able to laugh about these things. And I completely understand why other people don't. But I do want to mention that because I do laugh a lot in the interviews because I'm just hearing myself and it just sounds so insane.
No, I get it. And I think it's also important for people to realize that laughing can also be a trauma response. I have it.
Yes.
In my earlier interviews, guys, don't go watch them. I I think I laughed through a lot of the interviews and people are like, "Why is she laughing?" And I think it was my own trauma response of like, "Oh, let's just talk about this stuff because I just something just bubbles up inside and if you don't laugh, it comes out in other ways and laughter is easier than crying." And so it's
Yeah,
like it can be a trauma response, and it can also be us trying to move past the horror and past the trauma and past the sadness because you do go through stages. And sometimes the anger comes
absolutely.
back, sometimes the betrayal feelings come back, and then sometimes I just laugh about how ridiculous these beliefs were in Mormonism that I was like, totally, that makes sense. Like there were just so many times where it should have been so clear to me what I was believing. But, it's just part of your life. And so, like you said, you just have to laugh about it sometimes, and it's healing and it's okay. And
Yeah.
yeah, however,
We
however it
all
comes
deal with
out.
it in our own way. It's just,
Exactly. Exactly. So we have a super sticker here. Oh, sorry, Jonathan, I just trumped your comment. Thank you, Whitney, for your super sticker. We appreciate it. Okay, Jonathan, you can put the other one back up. You are exceptional. You give me hope. I have lived through heavy things, and seeing how you are today makes me want to continue fighting. That's amazing,
thank
Marie Claude.
you.
Thank you for
Wow.
sharing.
That's beautiful.
It's been so interesting learning about your story. I'm a 20-year-old college student and I've been exploring religion this past year. Thank you for being strong enough to share and educate others. Oh, that's great. That's
Oh, thank
great.
you.
I love that people are getting so much from all of this. Hi, ladies. I love watching C to C vids. It's made me realize a few things about my life and the way I grew up. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing and speaking up. Keep doing what you're doing. Oh, that's
Thank
amazing.
you.
You guys are the best. Thank you for sharing your story, says Danielle. That's not Danielle? Danielle, is it? Mestenek? Um,
Oh no.
I don't think it is. I was like,
Face.
wait, is that Danielle?
I was like, Danielle's here. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. You girls are so incredible to be able to do the things you do. Thank you guys. Wow. Yeah, we've had I was just kind of checking every now and then. We've had a little over 500 people at any given time, so that's awesome. Hit the like button. Yes, Jonathan.
Yes.
So, do you have any final thoughts before we go? My computer, I need to plug it in. Any final thoughts?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I received so many messages. Thank you so much for all the messages. And yes, if you're going through it right now, just keep going. And also, so important to mention, I healed a certain way, but there is not one way for healing at all. My way was good for me and worked for me, but you need to find your own way and what works for you. And it took me
Mm-hmm.
years. We talked about the podcast where I went to therapist after therapist and it didn't work. I had to do plant medicine, all kinds of energy work and spiritual work. So if someone ever comes to you and says, I have the objective way for healing, run the other way.
Yeah.
Because it's not true. You know what you need to heal from whatever is whatever you're going through in your life. And you just need to listen to what feels best and don't let anyone tell you that their way is the right way or they have the objective way or you should do this. Whatever feels right to you, just do it. And we're all
Mm-hmm.
so different in the way that we heal, the way that we process information, the way that we process trauma. It's so individualized. So sometimes, I mean, when you're in a
Yes.
very vulnerable state, you can really get caught up in cults again, like a shaman or like a
Yeah.
therapist or like an expert on whatever. But you need to just always question everything, including your own healing process. I had to as well, and I had to leave a couple circles after I did plant medicine because it was enough for me, and it got culty, and I no longer resonated, and I walked away. But I chose what worked, and I moved on. So please remember that, like, healing is unique to you. So what worked for me
Yes.
absolutely will not work for you, and some of it might. Just remember, take notes and try it. But yeah, don't
Yes.
feel any shame about when you try something that worked for someone else and it doesn't work for you, because that's not how it works. You have your own
Yeah.
unique path to healing.
I'm so glad that you mentioned plant medicine can be amazing and it can be culty because yes, 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 and triple yes. You just have to be careful what you're getting into and keep your internal compass really sharp. So if something starts to feel off, just trust your gut and maybe you got what you needed and you can bounce. So I'm glad
Yes,
you mentioned that. And get a dog because they're great and
dogs are amazing.
they calm you, help you regulate, and cuddle is great.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
Thank you guys for watching live. We love it when you come and join us here and ask questions. Amazing questions tonight, guys. All really great.
Really
And they're
cool.
always great, but we had so much engagement tonight, which was awesome. And if you're watching this in the replay, leaving those comments after the video is up also helps continue to push the video so more people can find it and see it and become aware of these groups. And we just really appreciate your love and support. The compassion for our guests is outstanding. We mentioned it in the beginning. We just have such an amazing community who rally around our guests, and it just means the world to us and obviously our guests too. So, any other final thoughts? How can people find and support you, Serena?
I am on Instagram at Sir Kelly. That's SerKelley. I started a Substack recently where I write about random thoughts about my childhood that pop up and also about the things that I'm struggling with now, a lot to do with relationships. We also kind of gloss over the fact that because women were used as sexual tools in the cult, it's very hard to deprogram yourself and to come out of that with healthy relationships, with any sort
Mm,
of love and romantic relationships. So I've actually been very open about the struggles that I've had. in my love life. So that's on Substack, Juicy Details. And yeah, I'm mostly there, Instagram, Substack, and then I'm on TikTok, but not that much. But you can find me, Sir Kelly, SerKelley, on Instagram, on Facebook, Serena Kelley, and on TikTok. So if you want to connect with me there, I am also working actively on my memoir for 2025. So also, if you're an agent, still looking for one. So yeah, you can contact me and on my social media. And I do have 2 books out. I wrote a book of poetry all about healing through nature, not using any sort of therapy or using anything else, but what helped for me after I went through therapy and plant medicine and everything. I went out in nature for 6 months and drove across the US and just kind of did not speak to anyone for 6 months to find who I was and found my voice. And in doing so, I found
Wow.
my love of poetry and the incredible healing power of nature. It's called Sage of the Wild. And it's free right now for anyone who's listening to this podcast. It's usually $14.99, but I made it free because I know I was coming on this podcast. So you can get that at the link in my bio on
Wow.
Instagram.
Exclusive. You better jump on that, guys. Free?
Yep.
That's crazy. Thank you for doing that and for sharing and just being a light in this world. I mentioned that on your reels. People are like, "You're pole dancing. Why are you doing that? You know, you were
Yeah.
sexualized. Why are you still?" I'm like, "Girl,
Yeah.
we got to do things the way we want to do things." And I think your caption was great. And you mentioned how you have to reclaim your sexuality.
Yeah.
And some people, who've been abused and have those backgrounds choose to do the opposite. And that's okay too. And some of us choose to, I don't know, reclaim our bodies and get into our bodies again and
Yep.
choose to be sexy because we want to be sexy. And
Yeah.
maybe it's a combination of all the things. And you're maybe change your mind later. And that's fine too. But I think it's really cool that you're doing pole dancing because it's so hard. I did one class and couldn't walk for like a week. And it's
Yeah.
really an
It's really
athletic, beautiful
hard.
thing. Yeah. So you guys can check out those videos on her Instagram. All right, we've
Yeah.
already went over an hour. Wow, this has gone by so fast. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for your support. We love you. We appreciate you. The best way to support the podcast is always just interacting with the post in a positive, helpful way to our guests, constructive way. You don't always have to agree, but constructive is the key word. And we appreciate you. And I feel like there was something you said during the podcast. I just lost it. Where you're like, I can't believe I said that.
Oh,
When you were
cursing?
still in the,
When I, oh no.
no, when you were still in the cult and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. That's so embarrassing. Oh, you sent you sent a sketch of yourself to your
Oh,
cousins. We have a shirt that says I'm sorry for what I said when I was in a cult, and I feel like that's a good shirt for that moment.
I'll send that to my cousins.
Oh my gosh, so funny. So you can find that on our website at close2consciousness.com. We are going to Mexico. Actually, today we just released the new dates. We are going October 23rd through 28th. We're going to Oaxaca, the coast. We're going to be snorkeling, swimming in waterfalls, all this fun stuff. It's not culty, it's just super fun. We went to Costa Rica with people and it was incredible. So we're like, let's do this again, run it back. So we just launched those dates today. If you guys want to get the early bird spots, you can come with us to go hang out and adventure in Mexico. Link should be in the description for that. And I think that's it. Enough of me rambling. Thanks for joining us, Serena.
Thank you,
You're amazing.
everyone. Shout out to Victoria, ex-cult member who participated.
Yay! Shout out. Yes, we had
A
a
few
few people from Children of
ex-culties.
God. Yes, hit us up if you want to share your stories. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.